Sound speeds, and welcome to the as of yet untitled podcast. And this is episode 9, something like that. I think it's 9. Anyway, this episode is going to be a little bit different because I'm not going to just talk about sound related topics. However, it does affect sound people. There's 2 topics we're going to discuss in this video, and both of them you need to listen to. Let's get into our first topic. As of the time of this recording, the film industry is very slow, and that's because IATSE and the Teamsters are negotiating this year on new contracts, coming out of last year when the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes were in effect. So the film industry basically got pulled to a halt. Many people that I know ended up losing their houses or losing their cars or both, and some people had to completely change industries, even though they did not want to. And many people had to get strike jobs. Yours truly included. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the film industry is starting to slowly pick up again. And unfortunately, producers are taking advantage of crew members. And I'm hearing about this in the sound department. It is very important that we maintain certain standards. And one of the big standards we need to maintain is the quality of our work is worth a certain amount. And therefore, we need to charge for that amount. And I'll explain why. Let's just say that you're used to making, I'm just going to throw out a number here for ease of math, $50 an hour. Okay? If your rate is $50 an hour and a producer comes to town and says, I don't have that in the budget, I can maybe hire you for 48, you can negotiate for it. But when a producer comes to town and says, I'm offering 32, and you are hungry because you haven't worked in a long time and you really want to accept it, don't. And I can tell you why. If you accept it, and this producer is, let's just throw out a studio here, Warner Brothers. If Warner Brothers comes to town and they say, we're not going to pay $50 an hour, we're going to pay 32, and you accept it, what you are doing is establishing a rate precedent in your area. That means that every single time a producer comes back to whatever market you happen to be in, they're going to say, what is the rate that is going in that area? Well, the rate that was accepted last was $32. As soon as that rate was established, because somebody accepted it, then the next producer that comes into town is like, what are the going rates in town? Oh, $32 an hour? Okay. And they're not going to want to negotiate up. As a matter of fact, many studios, in order for them to negotiate at all, they're going to negotiate up only approximately 3% per year. So if the going rate in your area has been on previous shows, let's just say that the going rate in the area was $45 an hour, not quite 50, but you've accepted that because it's a long run and you want the work. And you know that's the precedent set in the market. But then because the producers come back to your market and they are expecting you to be hungry and they say, this is all we're willing to pay, take it or leave it, they know that the demand is extremely high for that job. And so if you don't accept it, they're expecting someone else to. Because when demand is high, guess what happens? When demand is high on any product, let's just say that I'm selling this USB stick. If it sells for $20 and suddenly no USB sticks are available on the market anymore, what happens to this price? If demand is very, very high for this, and let's say the supply drops. The supply drops and suddenly this high demand item is going to have an increase in rate, right? You may say, well, it's the same thing with jobs. In this case, the one that you just gave. So doesn't that mean the rate should go up? No. It's because the supply is way up and the demand is way down. That demand that I'm talking about is not the demand of the crew members looking for a job, because that is very high demand. Everybody's competing for the same jobs. What I'm talking about is the studios looking at the market and the supply rather of sound people. They say, well, the supply is way up. We can be very, very picky. If the supply is up, and as far as they're concerned, there's a high demand, but it is in their favor, and the supply is way up, they can say, well, we're going to drop our prices. The same kind of thing would happen if I was selling this USB stick again for $20. And then you suddenly say, we have 100,000 extra USB sticks per city. We want to get these things sold. Are they going to sell for $20? Are they going to sell for $25? Or are they going to probably drop them to maybe $5 to try to move them? to the point where people want them because they're in such they're such high demand only because of the price you set on it. If you drop it down to 99 cents, you drop it down to 50 cents, something like that, people are going to be buying them and stockpiling them up just so that way when the prices go back up, they can sell them. That's what's happening in the market right now as we speak. And this happens all the time. Producers come to town, they say, well, this is the going rate, and they're undercutting everything else. And the producers that are active right now, as of the time of this recording in April of 2024, looking for people, many of them have more money in their budgets. But when they are when they're shopping around looking for someone, who is going to accept this rate? Someone will. But it's very important that you not accept the rate, not just because you're hungry and you want the work and you're willing to negotiate and whatever else. You are bringing down the entire market by accepting that rate. You are establishing a precedent for the studio. And this is a precedent that is not just for a show or two. This is a precedent that could last for years. One of the big reasons why people who have been in the industry for decades and decades will say our rates were a lot better in the 80s and then they were still up in the 90s, but then we started losing the rates. And now they will tell you, I'm making the same money now as I was back in the 90s, but the difference is inflation has gone into effect and a lot more, and there's a lot more people in the industry, and I'm making the same money, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same spending power as it did a few decades ago. So the main point I am making here is, yes, I understand you're hungry. Yes, I understand you want to get back to work, but when producers are shopping around, they're looking for a deal. If they're looking for a deal and you know they are with a major studio, do not accept it. Now, if someone comes to you with a small budget, an independent thing, and it's non-union or it's just a very small budget, one-off, if they're offering scale, you can make that a judgment call if you want. But when the going rate in your area is way above scale. Like in my market, scale is something that people will laugh at. If you're not like double scale, then people are probably not going to talk to you if they're a skilled, sound person. Except right now, I'm hearing reports of people accepting lowball offers, and only because they're hungry and they want to get back to work. And if they don't accept it, someone else will. It is imperative that you and your friends tell your friends far and wide, do not accept those rates. Yes, someone's going to, unless we all stand together. You may say, well, someone's going to, I might as well be me and put my, food back on the plates of my family. If you want to be the person responsible for bringing down the market, bringing down not just your city, because sometimes neighboring cities or neighboring states will say, what does this city do? What are their rates? You could be affecting the rates in other cities as well. The way I look at it is many of us have not worked on a show since 2022. And those of us that did work on a show in 2023, it may have been before the 3% rates increase, went into effect. And those of us that negotiated above scale rates on shows like, for example, the Warner Brothers show, you negotiate 3% per year. Some producers are coming back in 2024 and saying, well, what was the last rate we had on the show? Well, it's 3% above that. No, I'm sorry. That was a 2022 rate. That was 2 years ago. You are trying to pay me what should have been paid last year. We now have another 3% raise. And to be completely honest, 3% isn't enough. Look at inflation. It's going crazy. Spending power is way down. This is one of the reasons why everyone's trying to raise what they pay people, trying to get people in there, because the unemployment rate is very low right now. I'm sorry, the employment rate is extremely high. Unemployment is very low. And because of that, the demand for workers is high, especially in entry-level positions. So they're trying to pay more money to get people in the doors. But this is where you need to, add a little bit of reason here, because if the demand is very, very high for those kinds of jobs, here's what you need to consider. Companies will offer a rate. Let's just say that they're saying, well, you know what, we were paying $12 an hour. Now we're going to pay you $20 an hour because everyone's telling us we need to raise our minimum wage up. And everyone then applauds companies for offering $20 an hour. Let me ask you something though. How often can you increase your rates like that? Remember, you can only increase your rates about 3% per year unless you can negotiate higher because you go from like tier 0 or tier 1 shows all the way up to big budget shows. Then you can negotiate up a rate that's more appropriate to that rate of show. But the important thing I'm trying to stress here is that productions, if they're offering a certain rate, you need to stick to that rate, whatever that is, because your rate is not going to increase by something like $12 to $20. And if it does, that's just maintaining the cost of living. To go back to what I was about to say, and I sidestepped here for a second, but I'm about to hop back just to finish this thought. I mentioned before that a lot of people have been pushing, saying, hey, you need to pay people more. You need to pay people more. Here is the complete honest, and I want you to stay with me for a second because this is something important. You may say, great, the companies are paying people more, but what happens? The companies have to make up for that somehow. So they're going to do what? Raise their rates. Maybe not tomorrow, but next month. Or raise their prices, not their rates. But guess what's going to happen? Companies can raise their prices anytime they want to and any amount they want to, not just 3%. So when you say, I want more money, and they only are willing to give you an annual pay increase one time a year of 3%, but in the meantime, they have increased their own rates by 30, 40% sometimes. Look at Netflix. They've gone crazy. Our Netflix, I think, went up something like $6 an hour or $6 per month. It went up like almost 50%. And have they increased their service? No, now they offer ads for the same level of service that you recently had. So they're going to make money on their ads or they're going to make money on you. And their prices have gone up by 40 or 50%. But guess what? Your spending power has gone down by the same kind of amount, mainly because you're not paid the same amount. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because people always say, raise rates again. Well, then the companies are just going to increase prices again. But then what's going to happen is eventually you're going to run out of money and inflation's just going to go out of control. So the solution is not to raise rates. The solution is to lower the cost of living. Make everything cost less. And that means that if the government really wanted to help, what they would do is they would subsidize certain things that would bring down the cost on goods. Like, for example, start with the cost of diesel. So that way, that logistics company, trucking companies, and those that drive, it costs less to deliver things. Prices would go down a little bit on that, and that would trickle down to a lot of other companies. That's just one example of something that they could do. And the only reason I'm throwing that out there is because my strike job, as many of you know, have been driving a truck, and I see a lot of things like that. And the reason I'm throwing this out there now is because there's a lot of things that people need to consider with regards to money in this kind of a market. And one of the big things that people are looking at is accepting something that's higher than what they are currently getting. And so if your current job is paying you $20 an hour and you're offered $32 an hour for a film industry job, and you say, well, geez, that pays a lot more money, that could really help me a whole lot, and you accept that, then what's going to happen in a couple of months once the IATSE negotiations are completely negotiated for and the production is backing up and moving? People are going to say, wow, look at this. The rate precedent has been lowered in this area. That means that people are willing to accept lower rates. We're going to take advantage of that. Our new precedent is. Or maybe they won't, but they sure could. So it is very important that you stick to your guns. Don't drop your rate more than just a little bit. I mean, if you want to negotiate, if you, for example, want to say, my rate is, again, throwing it out there, $50 an hour. Let's say your rate is $50 an hour and your equipment is on top of that. And they say, no, we want the equipment thrown in there for free. Why? Why should I throw in my equipment for free? Because you just want a deal? This is the equipment I need to do my job. I need to negotiate for that. And guess what? It's a different budget in the budget. And if they can't find a little bit of extra, when you know what they're going to do is bring out super techno cranes, an entire camera crew that operates that super techno crane. They're going to bring them out for 4 days. and not use them until the last shot of the day on day 4. And then they're going to say, why is things so expensive? Well, it's because you brought in the Super Techno crane and 3 crew members to operate it for 4 days in a row. And they sat idle until the last shot. That's why. Or they'll do the same thing with drones. They'll bring in a drone operator and their entire team of people, and they'll sit around twiddling their thumbs until the very end of the day, right before the sun rises. And that's when they decide that they're going to pull out the drone crew. So that way they have a expensive VFX shot where they have to fix it to make it look like it was night because the sun's coming up in the shot. It happens. The film industry is a crazy place. It's amazing anything gets done. It really is. People step over dollars to pick up dimes. And so I am giving you a very, very strong recommendation to not accept dimes now, because if you do, you're going to be accepting dimes or maybe quarters for the next few years. For our second topic, we're going to further discuss stuff that you need to be considering right now. If you were working on non-union shows and you're a non-union person, you can ignore this conversation, or in the words of Curtis Judd, you're dismissed. But if you work on union shows or you want to work on union shows, then please pay close attention, because what I'm going to cover right now is something you definitely need to hear. And hopefully this is something that's already embedded in you. When you became a union member, you had to take an oath. And if you say, "No, I never did the oath part," you should have. Your union should have made you take the oath. And so what you should do is, if you are in the union, you need to accept that you are a member of the union, and that is an oath-based thing. So when you actually filled out your paperwork at the very beginning and you said you would agree to the bylaws and you would agree to things, once you are voted in, you are approved and you are accepting of that. The same thing as when you install a piece of software and you say, I'm not going to read this thing, accept. You install an app, sure. You get all these rights, sure, accept. Permissions, fine, take whatever. Same kind of thing happens with what I'm talking about here. When you join a union, you are basically saying, I accept the rules. And one of the big rules is that you will hire your union brothers and sisters. So if you are working on a union show and you are a department head, a sound mixer, and you're like, well, I really like my friend. I've worked with him, or I've known him for years. I've known her for years, and I want to bring this person along on the show with me, but they're non-union. Make them join the union before you hire them. If they've been expelled, make them rejoin the union and settle the affairs with the union before you hire them. Not only is it important to have union people on union crews, but you can be in violation of your oath and be brought up on charges, because it is your oath that you will hire union people. And so if you knowingly hire someone who is non-union for a union-related job, you can be brought up on charges. And as mean as it may say, you need to play no mercy when it comes down to calling out people that hire non-union people, not just because you're hungry yourself and you want to work and you're like, well, you know what, maybe if I get this person in trouble, they're going to hire me. Don't look at it that way. Look at it as the collective bargaining. Look at it as everything that you have built and you pay for with your dues. You pay your dues, and you want to allow someone in to accept all the benefits, because all the benefits that have been negotiated for the crew are for union people, and it's expected to be union. And the department heads are expected to hire union people. The productions expect this because they want to maintain a certain standard. And many unions require things like contract services to maintain safety standards with regards to their crew. And, you have to maintain, you could get certified for sexual harassment and things like that. So that way you are in the books as having been compliant and you are up to date on all of the skill sets and the training you need to be. But if you're non-union, productions expect you to have done all that, and it is not a requirement for non-union people. So that means you could be pushing gear off the trailer, even a veteran, and that person just does not know any better. and they push a cart right off, and then someone who doesn't know any better is going to try to stop the cart that's coming off the back because, the lift gate's starting to go down and it starts to do this number, and the cart starts to roll because it's not chalked or there's a foot under it or anything like that. And the person on the ground tries to put their hands up because they think for some reason they're going to be able to stop 600 pounds of cart going down. And then their foot slips in the mud or whatever, and then suddenly they're crushed. Believe it or not, I've known this to happen. I'm actually recalling right now what I'm telling you happened to a camera assistant. And this person, I don't know if they're back in the industry now, but what I can tell you is that this person was non-union filling in for the day. It is very important that if you're going to be working on a show, that it is of a certain level, and that level is high enough for you to be a union show. It is imperative that you hire a union crew. Plain and simple. Not just because it's your oath, but because it is the right thing to do on a production show to make sure that if you are on that show, you have safe people around you that have taken the same certifications and the same training that you have for your own good, for everyone around you's own good. Because if you don't, then what's to say everybody's just going to say, well, I don't need to be union apparently to work on these shows. And then suddenly no one is. And then we have all these shows that are non-union. And then all of these better conditions that have been fought for in the film industry. And you may say, well, there's a lot of right to work states. Yes, but guess what happens? When union production companies decide they're going to go to your state and they run a union show, they expect you to be union. And yes, the state can say, well, you can't really uphold certain laws and rules. Those are not legit in your state. And that's completely accurate. But here's the thing. Unions can say, the union shows can say, we expect you to hire union crew. And the unions can say, you need to hire union crew on union shows. And it's part of your oath to do so. So if you're in the union, you should hire union. So I know this probably came off more as a rant times 2. And there's a good reason for that. I'm seeing a lot of sloppy behavior, and I'm seeing a lot of people do things that they should not be doing. And I've seen some people turn down work because they are sticking to their guns and doing what they should be doing, only for someone else to come along and say, oh, I'll do that. And then they're the one that lowers the market. And there is no scolding of people who do this. I'm not going to start naming names, but what I will say is that you definitely need to take these 2 things that I mentioned in this video to heart. If you are non-union and you want to work on union shows, join the union. If you are non-union and you work on only non-union shows, fine. But what I discussed in this video regarding money and regarding your oath, if integrity means anything to you, then, there you go. I think I've made my point already. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Sound Speeds, and be sure to tune in the future where I actually talk about things that pertain to sound people, teach people about sound, and as always, offer you sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.